This is Comic Shenanigans, episode 1059, a conversation with BRIAN Cunningham.
Ain't no stopping them shenanigans. Love getting into shenanigans. All up in them shenanigans. 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 Shenanigans.
Welcome to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. This is episode 1059. It's another conversation with BRIAN Cunningham. I am your host, Adam Chapman. BRIAN was previously on the show back on episode 1054 from August of this year, as we talked about, his 15 or so years working at Wizard Magazine. We didn't really talk much else at that point. We really just focused on Wizard Magazine. So today he's back for a much needed second conversation and potential for another third one. And this was a lot of fun, getting to dig really deep into some Wizard lore. I had a lot of questions that I had always wanted answered, or just certain things that had popped into my head. It was fun to do a deep dive into Wizard with someone who's there and experienced a lot of this and has firsthand knowledge of many of the events that kind of occurred over the course of the years. He also worked at DC Comics for 12 years, so we talk about that as well, what it was like to kind of go into actually editing books. We talk about working with Ghost Machine, which is where his current travels have landed him, where he's the editor-in-chief of this new company, the publishing imprint, to develop all these books, with creator-owned books with some really big talent. So it's such a pleasure to talk with BRIAN. It's so much fun. He's so knowledgeable and knows so much, and so I really relish the opportunity to be able to pick his brain and talk about in some cases, extremely specific stuff, but little things, and about the culture of what made Wizard. It was nice to kind of talk about some of that stuff. Like, again, there's some very niche examples that I bring up, but I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you out there listening to it will enjoy it as well. You can email me at comicshenanigans@gmail.com, rate the show on Apple Podcasts, listen to us on Apple Podcasts, and also listen to us on Spotify. Upcoming episodes that I'm excited to be having. We're going to have Robert Venditti come back on the show to talk about his work on Superman 78. There's actually 2 miniseries now that have come out, and so I'm really excited to talk with him. I haven't actually recorded it as of this moment, but I'm excited to talk to him about that. We're going to have another Book of the Month Club coming up soon in this coming week. It is going to be a bit of a change of pace because not everyone who was supposed to have the material read was able to have it read on time. So we're going to do a pivot and do something different for this particular week, month, I should say. And there's other really exciting new episodes coming up soon. We got people who have worked at Marvel Editorial. I think Jason Liebig's going to be coming back soon. Tom Brennan is going to be coming on the show at some point, working on some other interviews and other special things to come as well. But some great stuff coming up. And again, this was a great conversation with BRIAN. You can email me, as I said, at comicshenanigans@gmail.com. Let's get right into the episode, why don't we? As I'm sure you're done listening to me prattle on. And so here, once again, is BRIAN Cunningham. Enjoy. BRIAN, welcome back to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. How are you today?
I'm good, Adam. Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. It was an absolute treat talking to you before. You answered a lot of interesting questions I had about Wizard Magazine. I really enjoyed hearing more about the magazine, so we're going to spend a little bit more time doing a little bit more of a deep dive into Wizard if you're game.
Totally game. Let's get into it.
Okay. So one thing we lightly touched on in our last conversation, but I wanted to dive a little bit more into it, is obviously as Wizard is humming along, you start to see more Wizard special publications. You see other things coming out from Wizard, and some of them you are credited as contributing editor. We kind of mentioned before, you had like a Spider-Man special edition, actually multiple. You had X-Men ones. I'm curious what the genesis of those were and what the agreements were like with Marvel to even get those to come about, because you're at the time you're doing a lot of deep dives into the history of the character, but also obviously it's a promotional material for upcoming stuff that's coming up in Spider-Man or X-Men or whatever the case might be. So I'm really curious how much behind the curtain you can kind of show about how some of these things came about.
Well, I I think, like a lot of things that probably come out of things like this, it was. I think a lot of it just had to do with trying to increase revenue, and also keep in mind in the regular monthly issue of Wizard, we're really only dedicating a handful of pages to any one particular character or event that might be happening, and being able to kind of take a little bit of a deeper dive on the on whatever's happening in that moment. It allows us to get more into the history of the character, and also give a lot of focus to whatever the event du jour was of in that moment. And it was relatively easy to, I mean, at least from my perspective, I heard nothing about any, pushback from the publishers. I mean, basically they're getting free promotion of whatever their big thing is at that point in time. So, it was, it was kind of mutually beneficial. And, my participation in those varied. Sometimes, the one constant would be I was involved on the front end in coming up with the content. And then, but mostly the day to day, and a lot of it was Doug Goldstein, who was editing a lot of those specials when we started ramping up, production on those. And, he was pretty much, the dedicated, specials person, along with Toy Fair. I think at the time he was also editing. And, I think sometimes they would get me to do the actual writing on some things, or participating in conceptualizing individual articles and whatnot. Like if there were, top 10 lists or whatever, I would be involved on that. But ultimately, my role was peripheral. I mean, I wasn't driving that train, so much. I mean, really all credit goes to Doug Goldstein and the specials crew, that he had to work with. They did the lion's share of the work and did a wonderful job at that. I mean, the design crew, as I mentioned in the first podcast, our design crew was just such a top-notch unit that, they made everything look, pretty, but also, kind of, in line with the design aesthetic of the main magazine. Yeah, what we actually, I want to say in the early 2000s, we did something unusual, and I think we only did 2 of them that I can recall, but we did a Spider-Man Masterworks or something like that, I think it was called, and an X-Men Masterworks edition. These were hardcover reprint books that had editorial content within it. But we would reprint comics that that we thought was, hold on, I actually have them right here on my shelf. At least I think I do. Yeah. So
I think I remember seeing those mentioned. I don't think I'd ever actually seen any in person before.
Yeah, they're called Masterpiece Editions, and we did one for X-Men and one for Spider-Man, and we reprinted the Dark Phoenix saga, we reprinted Days of Futures Past, and we also reprinted the Power of Proteus. And the last John Byrne issue in that run, which was Uncanny X-Men 143, and tacked onto that issue 150, which was a Magneto double-sized issue. Now, when we approached Marvel to do this, we kind of we said, hey, Dark Phoenix Saga and Days of Futures Past, you have those files. Those pages have been restored and for digital color and all that stuff. But the Proteus and the Uncanny X-Men 143 and 150, they had not been restored up to that point in time. And so we said, look, we will pay for the restoration of those books if we can run them in this hardcover. And basically it was considered, I guess, a licensed product. In between the stories, we did an introduction, like Jim Lee did the introduction to the X-Men one. We did a little editorial page kind of as a lead in to each story about, kind of giving a little perspective on, the impact of the story. Quotes by Chris Claremont and, just little editorial stuff like that they wouldn't get anywhere else. We would do, like the silliest mutant powers and, the things that we would do, just kind of lighten it up a little bit. But these books they're terrific. I mean, they're just great reprint books. And we only did 2 of them. I have no idea if they did well or not. I guess if they did well, we would have done more of them, but we didn't. We paid Elliot R. Brown to do a kind of a Marvel handbook style inner workings of a Sentinel, and that was cool. Just lots of stuff like that. And for the Spider-Man one, we basically took the same approach. We paid for everything that hadn't been restored yet, which in this case was, Pat McCallum and I, these are some of our favorite stories. These are some of the earlier Spider-Man stories we read as kids, and they still held up. And, Brian Bendis did the introduction to this, and, we did the death of Jean DeWolf, and we reprinted the Venom stuff, the Juggernaut story, the Mr. Hyde and Cobra story, and basically we got to do something we didn't really expect to do, but it was I don't even know whose idea it was, probably Pat's, to do that. And, stuff like that was like, I don't see, like, you don't even remember it, but for me, it was like, wow, that was like a real feather in the cap that we were able to do something like that, and being able to appeal to Marvel, like, hey, we'll pay for the restoration. And of course, Marvel has done a lot more with those pages than we ever did here. So, I think everyone benefited slightly, at least, I benefited from just being able to say we did it and had fun. And getting it out there to the Wizard audience, like, hey, these stories are fun.
Yeah, I remember seeing it like in the pages, but I don't remember ever actually seeing any in Canada that I ever would have actually kind of seen in person. But once you mention it, and I'm doing a cursory look at it now, and it looks like there was a Wolverine one too. Looking at the covers, I'm like, oh yeah, I totally remember seeing this in the pages of Wizard and seeing ads for it, but never being able to see one in, like, live.
Oh, well, yeah, I don't know how many are out there, but I completely forgot about Wolverine. I don't have that one, so I'll have to track that one down myself.
Question about, so in these special publications, as you mentioned, like, so obviously your degree of involvement does vary, and so, like, I think in one of the X-Men ones, I think you had like 20 pages, like on X-Men 101, that kind of stuff. Was that on top of all the other duties that you were doing with the magazines? Was that stressful or just more of a joy to be able to, as you say, kind of do more of a laser focus and spend more of a page count talking about a specific property as opposed to trying to kind of hit everything?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a labor of love for sure. It was the X-Men 101, like the facts about the X-Men and all that stuff. Was it like 101 facts about the?
I don't think this one is actually, because I remember that there was one like that. I'm actually going to check it.
There was
scintillating audio. Oh no, I guess it is. Yeah, it was really quick hits. Which again, as I said last time, as a kid, loved this stuff because not only did you give a quick, synopsis of something that happened or some sort of piece of information, you gave issue numbers, and that was huge. And so, like, that's a lot of my, nascent comic book knowledge comes from stuff like this. So you're to blame, really.
Well, guilty as charged, I suppose. I'll serve that sentence. That particular one, I kind of fond memories of because it was just me. Because at that point in time, the internet was not what it is now, or even what it was 20 years ago. It was very nascent, if at all. So it wasn't really a resource. So what I did was I took my X-Men collection and reread everything. And anytime in an issue I noticed, like, oh, that's a neat fact, I would jot it down. And that's how that came about, because I knew getting to 101 facts, or however many it was going to be a bit of a challenge. And that was the only way I could think to really do it, was to just, do the work and reread these comics. And it was fun. I mean, it really upped my game in X-Men trivia, although, nowadays I can't remember any of it, but.
It does bring up a very small little question, and this is more of a stylistic question that definitely something Wizard dabbled in, is that, and which kind of reminds me of the old school kind of Marvel bullpen idea, is that, you would have a text piece, and then you'd have obviously your byline, and then there'd be usually a funny little fact or, something just kind of thrown in there. Who usually wrote those? Was it the person who actually wrote the piece? Was it the editor? Like for example, in this X-Men 101 that you did, it then says, Wizard the Comics magazine editor Brian Cunningham discovered during research for this article that he prefers to be called Susan.
That was probably, that was definitely not me. It's a mixed bag. I mean, in Wizard proper, it would be one of the editors most likely. Every so often, a writer would write a really funny or witty bio factoid, and we keep it. But I would say 9 times out of 10, it would be either me or possibly Pat or whoever, Andrew Carden or Doug Goldstein. I mean, it really depended. But I mean, I think in the specials, a lot of that was probably Doug. That sounds like a very Doug thing. As
I said before, it made reading the magazine fun. Because because you guys didn't take yourselves too seriously. And again, a lot of the content was written in such a way that it was more conversational with the reader. It was having more fun. It wasn't just being serious. And so that kind of stuff. And that's why I kind of liken it to the old school kind of myth of the Marvel bullpen, is that you have this kind of sense of whimsy. Like, I have 2 more for you that were describing you. All Wizard editor Brian Cunningham needs to do is flash his Avengers identicard, and that A1 priority status gets some chicks all the time. That's from an Avengers special edition. And then also from that same special edition, it says the paperback version of Wizard editor Brian Cunningham's compiled history of eggs will be released in July.
They all, honestly, they sound all like Doug Goldstein humor. I mean, that just sounds like Doug. I don't know. I think Pat took particular glee at making me look foolish in those little bios. So that was I don't really care. I had no ego as long as it was funny. I didn't mind it.
When you were working on one of these types of projects, and this is maybe like a higher level question that's, I guess, maybe more for Doug, but, when you have a specific special publication that's going to be put out on a specific character like this, like what was the level of access that you ended up getting to the talent? Because, it's all in promotion of Marvel's materials. So like, was there ever any kind of difficult interviews or difficult, creators that proved challenging to be able to get a hold of, or was it pretty much like wide open because you're doing this kind of venture?
I don't recall us having any difficulty with anyone. It was, I think everyone was pretty open to talking about their work, because their work was important to them, and as rightfully so. And I think the fact that, not only were we interested and engaged with the work that they were doing, but, we were going to theoretically shout it out to thousands of potential readers, so who might not otherwise be either aware of it or, kind of on the fence with it, or maybe even like, I wasn't really interested, but now that I read this special or whatever, I changed my mind. It sounds actually really cool.
For sure. Now, a big picture question about with Wizard, and obviously Wizard had a lot of legacy that it has to the comic industry. An interesting one that I remember seeing as a kid and being really excited by was obviously it kind of birthed what eventually became Earth X, which was, originally, I guess, a sketchbook or an idea that was given to Alex Ross. Were you involved in that at that level, in that place, or was that interesting to kind of see how something that was in Wizard would take off like that? Like that really took on a life of its own.
Yeah, I was in the room, I believe, when we conceptualized it as just like, hey, can we ask him? I mean, at that point in time, I want to say Jim McLaughlin handled the heavy lifting of negotiating it, I believe, and helping to put it together, because he was the head of the promotions department, I believe, at the time. In addition to contributing to the various magazines. And so Jim kind of procured all of that. And, for us, it was just cool, like a really cool thing to do. We had no, we had no agenda with it, like hoping Marvel would see the brilliance of it and do it. We looked at it for what it was. At least, speaking for myself, I did not really see this becoming the thing that it ultimately became. I just looked at it as, wow, this would be really cool. And Alex went really above and beyond what I think we had even asked him for. And I just remember seeing the first sketches coming in. Jim McLaughlin would show them to me. I was just bowled over. I was just like, wow, this is going to be a really cool insert for us. And apparently a lot of other people thought so too. So, it became Earth X and, Universe X, Paradise X, all that stuff. It became its own little pocket universe. And it really kind of, I think that was really the project that, brought Alex to Marvel in a big way beyond Marvel's. And, he's been with them, I've probably ever since, for the most part. I mean, doing covers and this graphic novel, just really great material.
So I guess what you're saying is that really you guys should have been getting flowers from Jim Kruger all the time.
Well, I don't know about that, but I mean, certainly, and I think that was Alex's call. Alex, we went to Alex to do this, and Alex was like, hey, I want to bring in a writer that I feel I can work with, and we can do the best version of this. And he brought in Jim Kruger. I mean, I don't think I have that original Earth X insert anymore. I might have to go to eBay for that one too. But geez, look, all this, you're killing my bank account, Adam. You're killing it with all these mementos that I for whatever reason never kept.
So another question about special publications, and one that I really liked at the time was you guys did a CrossGen one, which obviously CrossGen now is kind of one of those failed companies in the in the annals of comic book history. But for me as a reader, it was hugely important because that was, for me, I guess it was starting in 2000, so I would have been like 16, 17 years old, and I was on the ground floor. I bought like the original special, and that kind of launched this new world. So I was like, I loved everything CrossGen. So I remember picking up that special edition for sure. But I'm curious just from you guys what your perspective was, because obviously Wizard comes out in the early 90s, then you have Image hitting, so you're kind of at the beginning of this new, really big company that's going to start to, try and challenge the big boys, and then you have CrossGen come. Obviously there's a lot of other companies in the mid 90s as well. Did CrossGen feel different to you guys looking at the industry and that be kind of pontificating about the industry and being journalists in the industry? Did it feel different than some of the other companies that had kind of come and gone in the mid 90s by that point?
Definitely, because what they were attempting to do, they did their contest to hire their artists, and was that a contest we did? I don't remember, honestly.
Might have been, actually. And I'm trying to remember, actually.
If we facilitated it, they ultimately chose, the winners. But the fact that they were trying to build a version of Marvel that didn't really ever exist in terms of a legit bullpen, where having the entire creative team, all the creative teams for all the books, all in one location, which was a really fascinating concept at the time. And we saw writers, like, for example, Ron Mars, who, was about a 2-hour drive from our office, where he lived in the Woodstock area. He just uprooted his life and moved to Florida to be part of this. And, the fact that they were willing to buy into this, and Ron had no illusions, and he basically looked at it as, well, look, if this all goes to pieces in 2 years, it'll be a nice 2-year Florida vacation. And, it turned out to be a little more than 2 years, but, he had a very open mind about it. And, the fact that they were all in one spot was just, for me, it was fascinating, as a social experiment, to see how that would work. The concepts were, the concepts were pretty simple. Like, some of it, was based on real historical stuff, but injected with a hard fantasy slant to it. And basically it kind of took a lot of especially the early books, it was more fantasy than any other genre. They would expand that over the years into other genres when they brought in, folks like Mark Waid and George Perez and Chuck Dixon, Steve Epting, when they brought in folks who really expanded the line. The fact that CrossGen was able to make a pirate book compelling and beautiful to read, I think that alone is kind of a testament to that line in a way. They were able to do some really fun things that no one else would have probably considered at the time. But like the pirate book that Chuck Dixon and Steve Epting, I believe, did, like, Epting's art on that was just like a revelation. Like, he just elevated everything from what I think people thought he was capable of, and ultimately that led him to Marvel and Captain America and all that stuff. And so that was kind of a cool trajectory.
I did feel like most of the cross-gen people, and a lot of them have kind of said this in interviews over the last two decades, is that, a lot of the people who went down there, the artists, all felt that they got better because they were working with the other artists. And so they would be seeing what the inkers would do on their work. They could see how they could tighten up or what they could do differently. They would see what other pencilers could do, and they could start to learn things that they could not necessarily have learned without working closely with other artists, and they just got better. So a lot of them, when they kind of come out of the cross-gen period, even ones who had already worked with Marvel before, like Jimmy Chung in the middle 90s there, his work was so much better and so much improved. And you have people like Justin Ponzer be coming out of there, who's just a brilliant colorist, and suddenly like everything he did was just gold. And all his work at Marvel. So I think all those people just got so much better. Like they all leveled up their game. So unfortunately the cross-gen experiment maybe didn't work, but it does have a legacy in terms of what it did for some of these creators that Marvel, for the most part, got to be the happy beneficiary of when they folded.
Absolutely. Yeah. Marvel just scooped up so many people, like Steve McNiven, for example, like he just improved leaps and bounds in a very short period of time while he was at CrossGen. Mike Perkins, with the Kiss Kiss Bang Bang book, showed people, he could do mainstream material, because I think at that point in time he was doing a lot of indie stuff. And I think he was primarily known as an inker, and Kiss Kiss Bang Bang allowed him to kind of flourish as a complete artist in the eyes of the mainstream. The coloring, as you point out, Justin Ponzer it was just really, the quality of the material, was incredible. Brandon Peterson, Jimmy Chung, so many artists, Josh Middleton, so many gifted, talented artists, that went through those hallways. I think of all of them, the person I talked to probably the most is Ron Mars. There's stories, obviously. When you put a whole bunch of creative people in a room together, things are bound to happen. It doesn't always make it to the page, but it was a fascinating experiment, and I'm sorry it didn't last. It seemed like it wasn't really built for success in terms of, some of the micromanagement going on from, the owner, Mark Alessi. At least that's what, these are things I've heard, that there was certain elements to, creative freedom that was, not available to the talent that they had, which, was unfortunate. But, anyway, yeah, it was fun.
It shone bright for a little while. As I said, like I was the right age to, be picking up every book as it was coming out. And again, it was, every issue is, glossy and long, and there weren't really any ads for the most part. I think that was the thing, right? I think they weren't really focused on that. It's interesting looking at them now, because I feel like they were really trying to pioneer a lot of things we take for granted today. But their website definitely looked better than most companies' most other comic publishers' websites at the time. They had the Comics on the Web, which was a very new kind of thing they were trying to push forward, which nowadays, when we have, Comixology and that kind of stuff, like we take it for granted that we can do that kind of stuff. But at the time, it felt very new and very, forward thinking.
Yeah, I don't remember that, but that doesn't surprise me at all.
I was a big fan, and I remember being so sad when it was shuttered, but I was glad to get to see all this talent migrate to Marvel, which was always my first love anyway. And getting to see, as you said, like some of the books that all those guys migrated to were huge hits in the mid to late 2000s.
Yeah.
So Yeah, it was an interesting time. Yeah, I was always curious what people in the industry thought of it because they were this brand new, another upstart. Like, I'm sure Marvel was kind of like another one. Like, Tom Brevoort's kind of said that, like, they weren't really worried about it because they were used to constant new companies coming about. And so it just felt like, well, this was just the next one. Not that it was necessarily anything special or different. Obviously, its model was very different but obviously not something that was, likely ever going to be attempted by anyone else.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a shame. I don't know. I guess it takes a billionaire maybe to be able to do something like that. But I would be surprised if anybody tried that again. But I'm actually waiting for the oral history of CrossGen because I have to imagine that is a fascinating read by all accounts. I have heard so many wild stories of weird behavior, and just, ego clashes and, micromanagement, but also people who became lifelong friends. It's not all sordid, it's not all conflict. There's a lot of joy came from that experience as well.
We were talking about Alex Ross before, and obviously the Earth X of it all. I'm curious, now I can't remember the year, so forgive me, but at some point, I guess it was late 90s, early 2000s, Wizard did put out like an Alex Ross special. Like, it was just, I think it was a square bound as well. But it was just dedicated just to Alex Ross, which at the time, I mean, obviously he was a pretty big hit artist and definitely did something that was different than most other people. I'm curious, do you recall that, that when that would have been kind of initially brought out? Were you part of that special when it came about?
I'm sure I was. I don't remember specifics, but I mean, I know, when we were thinking about doing, at that point in time, I think specials were more like when we can do it, or look, this character, this creator, has a lot of momentum behind them. We should capitalize on this. And, because at the end of the day, we wanted to be a profitable company. So, we wanted to do something that we felt would make money, but also as fans, we wanted to do something that we were fully engaged with and, enjoyed doing, and enjoyed being a part of. And Alex, was totally game for it. I think, he might have been flattered. I don't know, but he was, very agreeable and gave a generous amount of time, to us to be able to put it together. And, he might regret that part. I don't know.
It is interesting because I think, again, as a younger reader, that was tremendously important for me to really appreciate Alex in a different way. Because I remember a big part of what I loved about that special was that, and again, this is, the internet's not what it is now, but so being able to kind of go through it, and it was breaking down a lot of his references and the little Easter eggs he was putting in his art that was in Marvel's or any Kingdom Come was huge as a reader, and someone who maybe didn't know all those references, but suddenly I'm reading this special that you guys put out, and suddenly I'm noticing all these Easter eggs because you guys are pointing them out for me, and I get to engage with his art in a way that I didn't or wasn't before because I wasn't privy or didn't realize what was actually going on in his art. And that was really special to me. So I was appreciating something like that.
Well, we love those things. I mean, and if memory serves, this is an example of maybe a 5 to 8 page feature that ran in Wizard at one point in time. And then when we did this special, we took that out and expanded it, because we suddenly had the page count to do that. And, this is one example of us taking something that we had a finite amount of space for and being able to really do it justice by blowing it out into a much larger, editorial piece. And And we loved that. I mean, it killed us having real estate that we had to, we had this limited real estate of pages. And, there were so many things where we just wanted to really go further with things, whether they be interviews or these types of Easter egg, things, or director commentary style pieces. I mean, we tried to do the best we could with the limited space we had. And sometimes in a special, we were able to kind of expand upon what we had originally done.
Interesting. Yeah, it was just one of those things I was enjoying. So hats off to you guys.
Oh, I'm glad you liked it, because we had a blast doing those kinds of things.
So I've given the short thrift to post Wizard, so I do apologize. So when your experience with Wizard comes to a close, so how difficult was that for you to be, like, were you ready to move on, or like, how did it come about, and what was it like for you?
Well, it was a long time coming, honestly. I was let go in August of 2008 after 15 years at the magazine. And, I was really actively looking to leave in around 2000, and for whatever, it didn't work out, which I think I got into the last time we talked. But then, I kind of found another groove, and then Pat was fired, and, that came out of nowhere. And that just changed the complexity or the complexion rather of everything. Not having Pat, there, it was just such a gaping hole in the editorial department. And I think we all did our best to try and honor what he had done, what he would do. But it just wasn't the same after that. And I think over the course, I think that was 2006. That just came without any warning. And, there was no indicator that any of that was going to happen. So in 2007, maybe it might have been the end of 2006, maybe into 2007, Scott Gramling was hired. Scott had just come off of, I believe he was at FHM magazine, and Scott had worked for Collector Sports Look, which Wizard Press, I guess at the time, published as a sports card. It was basically what Wizard was, but for the sports trading card community. Unfortunately, there were other magazines out there that did what Sports Look was trying to do, and did it well enough for folks to really not want to invest in Sports Look, even though, it was a high quality magazine. For whatever reason, it just never found its footing. And Scott was part of that crew. So the company brought him back as editor-in-chief, and Scott brought with him a completely different sensibility. And that's not to say it was a bad sensibility. It was just different. And, he's had a lot more experience since he had left the company in like I think probably the mid to late 90s. I think he had left. And yeah, it was weird. I mean, I think Scott, I'm not sure about this at all, but I think Scott was behind turning the magazine, into changing the the size of the magazine from a comic book shape to a traditional magazine dimensions. And, you know, I think the thought in the company was that would make us feel more legit, like a magazine, like we would be racked differently or something with other, you know, other magazines. I'm not actually sure. I was a little, you know, I was a little reticent about it. I wasn't sure this was the right way to go, but, you know, on the plus side, the larger page size allowed for bigger art and little more text and things like that. So there was a editorial benefit to that. And I just decided to embrace that aspect of it and do that.
Ask a question there. Sorry,
yeah.
This is such a weird minutia question.
Yeah.
Was this the time, I think, or was it earlier, where you guys lost the square-boundness? Because at some point you guys were square-bound, right? Am I just thinking
we were
of this
square-bound all the way up until we changed the size to a magazine, and then we became saddle-stitched with staples, and so we had to kind of mimic the spine, because the spine would have information on it that we no longer had the spine for. So we had to kind of create a design spine along the fold on the right side of the cover to kind of give the illusion of a spine, so that, you know, folks can see the issue number and whatever, you know.
That's right. I forgot about that. I don't have as clear memories about that, but when you mention it, I'm like, okay, now I remember seeing it kind of on the left-hand side where the spine would have been. Yeah,
and that was I'm not sure if that was a Steve Blackwell or Matt Tierney call, but you know, it was a neat touch. It was a very elegant solution to having no more spine to find you know, to populate with relevant information. But anyway, as 2007 went along and you know, going into 2008, the company just started letting people go. You know, it became pretty common every week, every couple weeks. You know, especially I think when we shut down the website, the wizarduniverse.com website, which, that was something that I think we launched in 2006 and relaunched, I should say. And we had a message board and we had a really great community. Pat was very gung-ho about having the staff interact with folks on the message boards and all that stuff. And that was a lot of fun. You know, there were a couple bad apples here and there, but for the most part, everyone was just wonderful. Everyone was a fan. Everybody, you know, engaged and had a good time. But when Pat left, it became, you know, harder to do the work, but also engage on the level that we used to. So yeah, anyway, so yeah, I got let go in August of 2008, and I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming no matter what, and you know, it was still a surprise in a way. Like when the day it actually happens, it takes you a little off guard. It just kind of, you know, takes you out of your lane of what you're doing at the moment. And it was basically Scott Gramling and Joe Yanarella, who, you know, I've known for both of them. I've known for a long time, and it seemed like they felt worse about it than I did. Like they clearly did not enjoy this, and not that anybody enjoys firing somebody. Because it wasn't about cause. It was more just, this is the direction of the company. We had to shed payroll, all that stuff. And I got it. I understood that. You know, and in the moment, I you know, I was okay with it. You know, it just like, okay, this is over. Which was weird because for 15 years that was my life, and now suddenly it's over. I will say though, having a place to call home to work for 15 years, you just accumulate stuff. I mean, just a lot of stuff. Like part of the decor of the office was mine. Like I had the perimeter of the bullpen was all these Marvel character busts, mini busts by Bowen Designs, and there had to be there's a ton of them I had, and now suddenly I had to figure out, okay, how do I get all these out of here? Like I actually had to come back to the office like a week or two later to basically pack those up. Which was awkward, but to everyone's credit who was still there, Andy Serwin, Mike Cotton, all the folks who were still there helped me. I mean, they all pitched in and helped me pack those things up, which I will be forever grateful for. It was a hard time. It was tough. And not that long after I had left, the company moved into Manhattan. They moved from Rockland County into Midtown Manhattan. I think Scott was much more accustomed to being in the thick of things in New York, and like traditional publishing, if you're a publisher, you're in New York City. So they moved to New York City, and I kind of still kept in touch with folks there here and there, but I know that commute for most folks was not pleasant. But for me, I just started making calls, and I don't know, I can't explain this, and I don't know what it was about that particular point in time, but for whatever reason, my usual sense of impending doom was not present in my brain.
Oh, really?
Like I knew, like in my heart of hearts, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to find a job. I'm going to find a great job, and it's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen, but I am going to will it to happen just by the virtue of talking to people and kind of relying on a lot of the relationships that I had forged over the years. And it turned out that DC happened to be looking for an editor because I think Steve Wacker at the time had just made the jump from DC to Marvel to edit the 3 times monthly Amazing Spider-Man, because Steve had edited the 52 series throughout, I think, at least 3/4 of it. And Marvel tapped into his expertise on that and to run the Spider-Man office, which he did to great success. But they just, and I think, Nachi Marsham, was also leaving, to go to Disney Publishing. Nachi would become, the publisher of IDW, many years later. But actually Nachi was an intern and then an employee of the Wizard magazine called Inquest, the gaming magazine. He was part of that crew, and then he left to go to DC to edit comics. So just one of those fun serendipitous connections. But anyway, yeah, so I started at DC in October of 2008. Yeah, that was incredible. I mean, that was just, like Liz Gerline, now Liz Marsham, who married Nachi. She was an editor. I think she had just been promoted to being an editor, and I was inheriting some of the books that she was working on, and Liz was just tremendously welcoming and helpful and friendly and everything you could ever hope for someone in my situation. It was just learning the ropes. Liz was just the best. I cannot overstate it. I mean, she's just a lovely person. Just amazing. I will always be so grateful for her helping me out. In addition to Rex Ogle, who has since become a award-winning YA author and graphic novelist. Rex was the assistant assigned to me, and Rex was also extremely helpful. Rex and I, Rex was really the first true assistant I ever worked with, and I kind of had to learn how to work with an assistant, because at Wizard, I worked with other editors, but it was different in that it was really just the two of us working on all of these books together, and I had to learn how to manage that and not screw up. And Rex was very much a process oriented person. I think Rex came up with he created the assistant editor's manual for DC at the time that we would give to new assistants. But that's what Rex's brain just worked like that. And he was just so good at, organizing that sort of thing. But I think Rex really aspired to be, a creator. I think that was where his passion really lied. And ultimately he followed that path, and I'm glad he did, because, he's been doing amazing work. I mean, since he left DC, it's probably the best choice he ever made. But that said, I'm still super, super grateful for him and helping me out, learning the ropes, at DC along with Liz. They were instrumental in my introduction to the inner workings of DC, the politics, the personalities, like all of this. They would kind of help guide me on, you don't want to, this person, you don't want to do that. You want to do this. Make sure when you make notes in the margin, use a red pen. That's like things that, might sound obvious, but like little pet peeves that other people in other departments had to work with was good to know. The other thing about DC that was very different from Wizard was not only it was a bit more corporate. They had an actual functioning human resources department. And they also, DC also just had a lot of departments that Wizard didn't have. Like Wizard, I wore a lot of hats, as you would in a small company. And at DC, there are other people wearing those hats now, and you just have to worry about this hat that you're wearing. And that was hard to kind of tap the brakes on, because of my instinct for 15 years was to roll up my sleeves and just do what needed to be done, however it needed to be done. And at DC, you don't have to worry about that. These folks over here take care of that. Don't worry about it. You're going to work with them, but that's their domain. It's not your domain. And that took a little bit of learning too, where it's like, no, you don't need to worry about that. Just worry about this. This is plenty that you have to deal with over here. And it turned out to be, yes, it was plenty. It definitely filled the days and then some. Editing comics became, almost like a 24/7 kind of role, because you're working with talent all over the world, all in different time zones, and they might need reference at, 10 p.m. Eastern time. Sometimes that happens, and you don't want them to slow down, so you do what you got to do. But otherwise, it was DC was an amazing experience. I met so many great people, so many talented people, both editorially and creatively. It was really an experience. I can't even encapsulate the experience. It was really incredible.
I have a question. I mean, when you're at DC, I mean, it's a pretty interesting period because there's a lot of ebbs and flows in that, 12-year period. But obviously, I guess the biggest one would be the New 52. And obviously, that's going to be, for years, going to be a really interesting kind of moment. And obviously, there's other ones that come after that. You have Rebirth. You have these other kind of smaller shifts. But obviously, New 52 is one of the bigger seismic shifts that DC had had in a long time. And this is a company that's done Zero Hour and Infinite Crisis, but this was a bigger one. So, what was it like for you to kind of be in the room when something like that's not happening?
It was kind of wild. At the time, I really wasn't in the room. At that point in time, I was still what we call a full editor. The editorial hierarchy at the time was an assistant editor, then an associate editor, and associate editors edit 2 to 3 books on their own in conjunction with the group editor, and then the full editor, and then the group editor. Group editor pretty much, was involved in a little bit in every book, and the group editor was there. You could lean on the group editor for guidance, for advice, sometimes the group editor would be like, hey, you can't do this. This has to be a certain way. Because the group editor then dealt with, the executive editor, who at the time was Dan DiDio, and then, became Bob Harris as the editor-in-chief and all that stuff. But for the New 52, it was in the, New 52 was 2011. So I had been there 3 years, right? So, at that point in time, the DC line was selling poorly. It was selling, I believe, the worst that, at least this is what, all of this is basically what filtered down to me. The sales were not good. Marvel was wiping the floor with us. And I'm trying to remember what Marvel's big thing was that year or the year prior. It was AVX, and then it led into Marvel Now? No, Marvel...
AVX would have been 2012.
Okay. Then that was their response.
Yeah, so I think 2010, 2011 would have been, I think, Fear Itself was around there, something like that.
Yeah. Well... Okay, then I'm misremembering. AVX, I think, was Marvel's response to the success of the New 52, which was very successful for them. But in terms of DC itself, sales were bad. Apparently they were the worst they'd been in a significantly long time. And I think the pressure was on Dan DiDio to figure out, okay, how do we turn this around? Because, if we don't, we're going to have to let people go. And perhaps worse, who knows? And I'm speaking for Dan, but I don't mean to, but I have to imagine that was all going through his head. And so I think with Dan and Jim Lee, Dan's a very competitive guy. He doesn't like to lose. Nobody does. But Dan takes it personally. And, he knew we needed to do something big in order to kind of reclaim, part of the conversation in the comic book business. So, I think the original idea for the New 52, as I recall, it was, okay, we're going to relaunch the entire line, which was a big deal at the time because I think we were also going to relaunch Action Comics and Detective Comics. Like those decisions were a big deal. And at that point in time, we were just relaunching. It wasn't a reboot. It was a relaunch. And then the way it was presented to me, the Scott Lobdell written script to Teen Titans #1 was I don't know what marching orders Scott was given, but Scott, I think, just decided, I'm just going to do a reboot of Teen Titans, and he wrote the script that way. And apparently that impressed Bob Harris and Dan DiDio enough to sway them to, well, let's reboot the whole line. So originally we were just going to relaunch. So we were planning for a relaunch with the existing continuity, and then it became a reboot, and that changed everything. So suddenly, I want to say this was like March or April of 2011 or something like that. We didn't have a lot of time now to go back to our creative teams, and we're rebooting everything. So,
was it exciting or daunting? Like, once you hear,
it was a little both. I mean, it was exciting because we were doing something that, was pretty bold. I mean, no one would have seen it coming. And our flagship book would have been Justice League by Jeff Johns and Jim Lee, and how are you going to top that? So originally they were going to just take on a new iteration of Justice League based in the existing continuity. In fact, there were some pages drawn by Jim in that were eventually repurposed for other stuff. But yeah, and then suddenly now we're building a whole new universe. And we had to figure out, okay, is our first story going to be the origin story? And so editorially, we're like, no, we don't want all of these launches to just retell the origin, because that just will feel repetitive, and we don't want to do that. So, okay, so it's a relaunch, but they've all been heroes 5 years. So, they've been doing this for 5 years. Okay. All right. And then along the way, like, we had this Pandora character, this hooded woman who would show up in the background of every single issue #1. That happened while all the issue #1s were either already drawn or in the process of being drawn for the later books. And so we had to kind of go back in and shoehorn that in to make it a thing. I think the biggest critique of the New 52 from an editorial standpoint, and it's not, and it's valid. It's a valid critique, is that there really wasn't a plan long term for what we were going to do. And I think, some of that plan is hard to stick to anyway, because the market changes and you kind of have to pivot quickly. But that, I don't think it was not really in the wheelhouse of Dan and Jim to do that kind of long-term planning and kind of create a roadmap that just wasn't in their wheelhouse to do. And I think, that certainly was something for me as an editor. Like, that's the kind of thing I like to think about. Like, okay, let's figure out where are we headed. And that kind of made the chaotic environment of the New 52, you kind of had to strap on your seatbelt, because you pivoted a lot along the way. A lot of decisions, a lot of decisions that editors made were scrutinized. Like, could we hire this colorist? I don't know. That colorist is the colorist does too much brown. Like, oh, okay. So what about this colorist? But I mean, it got down to that level of decision making where everything was kind of second guessed, and it was challenging to manage those books, and it made it a little less fun. some books were more fun than others, obviously.
Which books were you editing at this time?
At this point in time, I was editing Green Lantern Corps, Flash, Legion Lost, but I wasn't editing the main Legion book. That was being edited by Chris Conroy, the Paul Levitz book. And what else was I editing at the launch? Red
You
Lantern.
took over Batgirl later, right?
Yeah, Batgirl was later. Batgirl was when I joined the Batman group for a little bit, where I took on Nightwing, Batgirl. I can't remember if there were any others, but any of the Green Lantern related books, I was pretty much, they fell under my umbrella.
I have a question about that specifically, because it always felt, and that when the New 52 happened, that for the most part, it felt like the Green Lantern books and the Batman books were kind of half exempt. Like, their continuity kind of still existed more or less the same. You could kind of squint away some of it, but for the most part, because it was continuing what previous creators were, like, they were still writing those books, and obviously Jeff Johns was still involved, that you weren't throwing it all away, you were still building on it, we were just kind of, as I said, kind of squinting at it and looking at it differently. So I'm curious, as an editor, how did you approach that challenge?
Well, that I believe was a combination of factors. One, both of those books at the time were our bestsellers. They were doing well. Grant Morrison was kind of streamlining the Batman stuff, coming off of the RIP and all that stuff, and now Batman Incorporated. And on Green Lantern, Jeff Johns was having a really great run on Green Lantern. So on one hand, it made sense to kind of keep them going, but on the other hand, it was also a little bit of a talent relations thing where it's like, okay, we're going to reboot the line, but we're not going to reboot this book you're working on. And that was, that I think was the compromise, because I don't think Jeff really, when I think the idea was presented to him, like, what do you mean? I just spent several years rebuilding the Green Lantern mythology, to get it to this point. And now you're telling me we're going to start over again. So I understand that. I would be probably mystified by that as well. But yet here we had this decision to make, is we're going to reboot the line, but not these two. Well, what can we, as you say, can we do half measures? Is there a way to give the illusion of a reboot when it's not really a reboot? And, I think Jeff sees the opportunity to kind of turn Green Lantern into a Sinestro book for a little bit, where it, became Sinestro and Hal Jordan as kind of a buddy book. And also, with Grant just kept, got to continue his Batman Incorporated story, without any real ripple effect. The reboot did allow Jeff to kind of, come up with some interesting things, like when he was approach to write Aquaman, he basically turned Aquaman into a little bit more of a Namor type character, as opposed to, someone from Atlantis, who grew up in Atlantis. It was a little more, made it a little more relatable. And the proof is in the success of that book, and the fact they made movies out of it that, had some success as well. People really, gravitated to that. So, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. This is a long-winded way of answering your question, but yeah.
No, it's one of those. It's one of those things where I'd be interested to see an oral history of that in maybe 10 years or so, when people are more further removed from the New 52, where they can kind of be more frank about it, because there's a lot of great things about it. I'm sure, obviously, there was a lot of challenges too. I think one that always seemed so fascinating and like crazy, but also they kept it up for so long, was that they kept the 52 books. Like, that's, an insane amount of books to be publishing, and obviously, like 52 was a special number to DC after the weekly series in the mid 2000s. Was that something that kind of stuck out to you as someone working there? That like, really, we're doing 52 books a month?
Well, the original idea behind the reboot was not to do 52 books, because I think at the time we were, man, I want to say as we were even getting close to soliciting these books, it was Dan who I believe it was Dan who came up with the label, the New 52, because if memory serves, I think Dan needed to. He felt that the reboot needed a label, and he was 100% right. At the time, I'm like, New 52, what does that even mean? I wasn't totally on board with it. I was like, people gonna even know what that means? And I was completely wrong on that. Dan was 100% right. It needed that kind of label, and I think having that label really helped it. In terms of a talking point for people, like, hey, have you checked out the New 52? And, it was easier for people to latch onto. My mind was blown when we launched, because it launched huge. And like the fact that the New York Times actually had writers review each launch week by week as they were coming out was mind-boggling. I couldn't believe it. Like it was that kind of it was that level of enthusiasm and excitement that I had never seen before. I couldn't get over it. I was really blown away by it. I still am thinking about it. We just don't see that at all. So
what always impresses me is how many different genres, again, kind of going back to the cross-gen of it all, that it wasn't all just superheroes, right? Like you had a war comic again, like you had a lot of different types of boxes, which hadn't been scratched in a while, especially by DC. And so it wasn't just superheroes, and it was allowing it to kind of be more broad. Now, yes, do you have a lot of Batman books? Sure. But you also have a lot of other things. And that always impressed me that they kept that going for a while.
I think I chalk that up to probably Dan, because I know Dan grew up, a DC reader of all different, genres. And, to his credit, Dan wanted a Western. He wanted a horror book. He wanted a war book. He wanted an espionage book. He wanted all of these different genres touched upon, because I think in the heyday of when Dan was buying actively as a fan, like he had all of these options, and I think he read a lot of those other genres, and I liked it too. I wish I could have worked on some of those books, because I love variety. I love superheroes, but at the same time, I think it was Jim Valentino who said, like, I like pizza, but I don't want to eat pizza every night of the week. So having all these other genres was kind of like a nice change of pace. And, it's a shame they didn't really work out beyond, I think Jonah Hex was probably the one, the All-Star Western book that, I think that was the longest lasting of the non-superhero kind of genre. But yeah, Jimmy Palmiotti and Justin Gray, continued on with that book, and, they did a great job with it.
Sure. Now, a question I have for you, because you worked on The Flash. So that first 2 years when you have Francis Manapul and Buccellato, like that was really special stuff. Like the art that you guys were getting from them was incredible. The stories were fun, but it was really the art that really took center stage and really, I felt like, blew everyone away. And some of the intricate ways of even just integrating, just the Flash kind of title page, and how they would use different visual effects to kind of do that. What was it like to see those pages come in? And obviously, like, Manipul had already been working on the Flash pre-Flashpoint, but now he's, working and writing the book as well. So what was that transition like, and what was it like to see those pages come in as well?
The Flash was by far my favorite book to work on throughout the entirety of my DC tenure. And I had the opportunity to work on the Flash a couple times, and I love the character. I can't explain it. I can't explain why, but I loved it. And having pages come in from Francis Manipul, it's like Christmas morning every day. And I don't know whose idea it was to approach Francis about potentially writing and drawing the book, because Francis hadn't not been a writer up until that point. But at the same time, I know Bob Harris, he was a big proponent of, and it shows in his body of work, Bob's, of allowing the artist to kind of take more of the reins on the storytelling and co-writing or writing. And he was a big proponent of that. So it wouldn't surprise me if it was Bob's idea. But I don't know. It was presented to me like, hey, we want Francis to write and draw this. And Francis had brought in Brian Buccellato, who he was friendly with. And I guess they maybe had done a little bit of work together, at when Francis was drawing for Top Cow. And Brian was a colorist. So they collaborated on the stories. And, there were some growing pains, obviously. I mean, like anything, it took a while for us to get into a groove. Like, I want to say we redid the first issue a few times. But by the time we got there, Francis did some spectacularly visual things with the Flash that really blew the doors off in terms of any expectations. The fact that he does, like in the script, the one contribution I can say with confidence, the one thing I did was add at the beginning in the title, on the title page, DC Comics proudly presents The Flash. That's it. That's the only contribution I know I made in all of the New 52. And Francis took that and incorporated it into the artwork in every issue. And it just made it special. And I'm like, hey, that was me. I came up with that. But Francis made it really, really cool. And I think that was something that the line started embracing. I think once they saw Francis doing that, they're like, oh yeah, we should be doing something like that too. Even if it wasn't drawn in, we would do it in, the titling and the lettering phase and stuff like that. So I think if I have any legacy from the New 52, it's the phrase DC Comics proudly presents. That's it. But you know what? I'm working with Francis right now on a new book called The Rockefellers, and he's doing the same thing. He's incorporating the title of the book into the art. That's become a thing of his that he's embraced and does it in everything he draws now, and it all happened because of Flash. So it's weird. It's full circle.
His stuff really did go next level there, but I guess a big part of it is that, now that he's writing it as well, he can visualize it in a different way and take control of it in a different way. He was already good on the Flash, like when he was working with Jeff, but once he's writing his own material, it really did pick up another notch, and it's interesting because obviously, now, how do you feel about the chin strap for Flash? Because obviously, New 52, you start to have more visual elements in the Flash's costume, which are not classic Flash. So I'm curious, was that more of a directive, and how did you feel about it?
Well, the chin strap came from Jim Lee. Jim had drawn basically, I think what's become the classic New 52, piece of art where it's all the Justice League characters in their New 52 outfits, in Jim's original design for Wonder Woman, she kept the Straczynski pants, and they were since abandoned with the relaunch of Justice League. But like when Jim drew the Flash, he drew him with the chin strap, and he drew all these characters with a lot of design work in the costuming. I guess to modernize them. I'm not 100%. I'm that's totally guesswork on my part, but I think Jim felt the need to add more visual elements and layers to the costume. So that's actually one of the earlier conversations I'd had with Francis. I said, "Hey, this is Jim's design," and Francis like, "Yeah, I like it, but can I play with it? Can I make it more me? Because this works for Jim, it doesn't necessarily 100% work for me." And I said, "Yeah, absolutely. Do you. You're the artist. So you got to draw this character hundreds of times. You got to be comfortable doing it." So Francis kind of took Jim's design and incorporated little bits and pieces, but he kept the chin strap. And there you go. You really have to look at the two and compare to see what Francis tweaked here and there. But the one thing for Francis, I think the one element Francis brought to the table, and this might have been a conversation between him and Brian Buccellato, was a lot of the design piping on the Flash's costume when he was in motion would light up. How when Flash runs, you get a little bit of that static electricity and whatnot. And he wanted to be able to show the Speed Force in a slightly visual way by having all this piping and stitching and whatnot actually light up as the Flash was in motion. I think at times we were still figuring that out. Like, is it always lit? Is it only lit when he's in motion? And I think eventually we just settled on, okay, when he's actually running, using his speed, that's when we would show it lit. And it made for a tremendous visual experience. I mean, I think of all the New 52 books, The Flash is definitely up there in terms of high quality, high octane visuals.
I would absolutely agree. What I think interesting about it, looking at it now, and I don't know if I thought about it at the time, but I definitely feel that way now, that there's a certain timeless quality to his art in terms of how he draws the character and like the world. Like it feels very warm, first of all, which I think is an important element usually for a DC story that's not set in Gotham, but specifically for Flash, having a certain kind of warm feel to the world. And then, yeah, there's just something about the art being very, I don't know, it didn't feel like it was trying to be heavy on details, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not trying to be disparaging of the art, I'm trying to pump it up, but there's just something very simple about it. Again, it sounds like a negative, it's not, but it's deceptively so, and it's comforting, it's very elegant, I guess is the better way of calling it.
I know what you're saying, and I think the warmth is really an embodiment of Francis as a person, as a human being. I mean, Francis is just, he's just a great person, and I am blessed that I not only know the guy, but I'm able to actually work with him and cheer him on with the projects he's working on at Ghost Machine. That's all Francis. And I'm seeing that same level of warmth, actually, probably a higher level of warmth in this book he's drawing now with me for for Ghost Machine called The Rockefellers, which is, it's a book about a family out of time. And I think he's probably channeling and being inspired by his own family. there's similarities between Francis's real life family and the Rockefellers, and I think he's really kind of taking a lot of that from his daily life, and it really shows in the warmth of the artwork. And yeah, he started doing that on Flash when he was able to kind of inject a little bit more of his own personality and sensibilities. So, you know, the fact that you pick up on that, I think is great.
So I'm going to have to let you go soon because I've kept you way past what I expected, but we haven't talked about Ghost Machine much, so we should. So how did you get brought on board Ghost Machine? And obviously in between DC and Ghost Machine, I think there was, Aftershock in the middle?
Yes. After I left DC in 2020, in early 2021, I want to say, but Pat McCallum was editing the Geiger series that I believe had just launched or was about to launch. I think he had edited the first 2 or 3 issues of that series, and I don't think he was happy in that role because Pat's not really. He's not really someone to organize. He kind of needs someone. He needs someone like me to kind of be able to help him do the things that he does well. And like that's the thing that we did well. Like I can handle the organization of things while also being a sounding board. But he was just an idea machine. Like I think he just wanted to do more creative stuff. And, so he had asked me if I would be willing to come on board to take on the editing. I think originally it was to help him. And I think, you know, that might have been, you know, his way of, kind of transitioning out of that role, very quickly. So basically I took on the rest of the Geiger miniseries, cause I have a long-standing relationship with Jeff Johns and Gary Frank, Brad Anderson and Rob Lee. We had all done several projects together at DC. So, you know, it was pretty much putting on a well-worn glove at that point, and, very comfortable. And so I just, you know, I edited freelance for Jeff and Gary. And then we went on to do Junkyard Joe, and then Aftershock came along in October of 2022. And, you know, they were having financial issues, and I went in knowing that. But I also was told we'll be out of this in a month. And, you know, I think they sincerely believe that, but, you know, for whatever reason, it never worked out. And then, you know, 2 months into my tenure, they had to declare bankruptcy. And then it was just damage control at that point. It was just, you know, basically trying to communicate with all of the talent I had really just been introduced to. Like, hey, nice to meet you, and I don't know when you're going to get paid, and you know, that those kind of conversations, which were challenging. But you know, the one thing about 12 years of DC is that I was pretty skilled at that point at being able to pivot quickly, and not get caught up in things. So, you know, the Aftershock experience, I was fairly well equipped for, and, you know, I never really got to develop much there. You know, not hardly anything, if anything. I know we read some pitches, and I was gung ho with a bunch of things that never got past the pitch stage. But yeah, and then, you know, a year, I would say, you know, over a year of that, with the hope that Aftershock would pull out of bankruptcy. It just never happened. And it still hasn't happened to this day. It's still trying to get out from Chapter 11. But I had to make a decision because Ghost Machine had launched at New York Comic Con in October, and they're like, look, we need an editor. Can you commit? And I had to make a call, and I'm bummed that the Aftershock thing didn't work out, because I liked the possibilities there, but at the same time, like, I knew everybody at Ghost Machine. I had been helping them, kind of incognito, as a consultant, because my day-to-day was not really full. So, I was available to them to have conversations and whatnot, along with everything I needed to do for Aftershock. But I made a decision to jump full time to Ghost Machine, and it's been a blast. It's been everything I hoped for and more.
You get to be it's interesting to kind of see your evolution. I mean, you've kind of ascended a few different mountaintops, and this is just the most recent one.
Yeah, the thing is, I mean, we all of us in Ghost Machine have an investment in its success. And, that's something I'm not used to. Usually I'm helping another company, achieve success. And at Ghost Machine, it's incumbent upon all of us to make it successful. And, we all take that very seriously, while also still having a good time doing it, because people are working on books that they are fully invested in, fully, very personal projects to all of them. And, I think the positive, the positive feedback we've gotten and all the vibes from the readership, and the fact that we've gone through multiple printings of first issues, second issues, third issues, like there is a growing readership out there that sees, that sees what I'm seeing, which is this is the best work these guys have ever done. And it's, and they're everyone in the company is betting on themselves, bringing their A game, elevating their A game to make this the best version of a comic book publisher that it can be. Our partners at Image are wonderful to work with. That they're obviously champions of creator ownership, and they've been instrumental in allowing us to be successful. So I don't know. Right now it's like it feels like a honeymoon period, but I do think that people are recognizing the quality of these books, and as we launch new series, which start next month in October, October, November, hopefully they'll appreciate those series as well and see the TLC that all of us is giving to them. And I don't know, I feel really good about it. I feel really good. Like I'm 100% behind all the books. I think they're all really great. They're books I would personally buy, no question. So, hopefully fans will see what I'm seeing and give them a chance and enjoy them like I am.
As you say, I mean, everything is different when you can tell that the creators, in this case, like, have real skin in the game. Like, everything matters more. It feels like you are getting, not that anyone's necessarily putting through anything less than their A game, but you know what I mean? Like, it does hit different when it's like, well, this is mine. This isn't someone else's. This isn't someone else going to come around and going to do this. This is me.
Yeah. And what you're saying, I mean, it's not like, any of them doing DC or Marvel work, that they're not doing their absolute best. But when, suddenly you're betting on yourself, you have to find a place to kick it into a higher gear. If such a thing is possible, but I think that everyone has really elevated, their work to a completely different level. And it's worth noting because these guys were already at the top of their game. So to see them perform at this level it's a gift for me to be able to, because like I was saying, with Francis's pages being Christmas morning, I get pages now from Gary Frank, Brian Hitch, Francis Manapul, Ivan Race, Peter Snayberg, like all of these guys, Jason Fabok. I mean, just tremendous work from all of them. And they're putting their hearts and souls into it, because they recognize that it's incumbent on them to do the best work, to do better than what they used to be able to do, and they're finding ways to do that, which is really impressive. I love working with every single one of them. I'm really blessed at this point to be able to be in the position I am, to be able to work in comics, and to make work that is being seen by an audience and appreciated. You just don't get that. You just don't get that all the time. Even at DC, there are books that I tried my best to make, try to put together a great team or, a really cool concept, and I really believed in it, and it just never found an audience. And, that happens. You can't control that part. You can only control making it the best possible version of what it is. And I think that's what we're doing with Ghost Machine, and it's just gratifying to know that people are appreciating it. People are seeing what I'm seeing. So it's cool.
It's great. I'm going to ask you one more question. It's going to be a very random, weird wizard question. It's going to be very specific.
Okay.
We talked in our last episode about how, really Wizard was born from a price guide, which is crazy to look back at. Obviously, it makes sense, but I never really thought of it that way. But obviously, that's where its original genesis was. So, Wizard Magazine, 1993, issue 24. Can you guess what you think that the price guide in Wizard Magazine said that Amazing Fantasy 15 was worth 21 years ago?
Oh, my.
The most random exit interview question I can imagine.
Wow. That was the Mark Bagley Spider-Man cover?
No, this is Amazing Fantasy 15. This is
but the Wizard issue.
Oh, the issue.
Oh, no, that was no, that wasn't Batman. I think that was Mark Bagley Spider-Man, I think.
No, I think that's a Batman costume. It looks like it's Asbats, but it's heavily shadowed.
Okay, yeah, the Joe Quesada cover for that.
Yeah,
those shadows had to be patched in, because,
really?
DC did not appreciate that. That was a part of the, we had a really great relationship with Joe Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti, and Joe was very, very giving in terms of doing artwork based on this costume he designed. And, but DC was like, hey, we don't want this out here yet, so put it in shadow for now. And, we don't want people to know exactly what this thing looks like yet. We want them to find out in the book. Like, well, it was a bummer, but we understood. I mean, we definitely didn't want to create any unnecessary waves. So Amazing Fantasy 15 in 1993.
As per Wizard.
Jeez. I will say, I don't know. I mean, $2,000?
$10,000.
$10,000. Okay. That sounds about right for 90.
What I find interesting, because I was flipping through the price list, I was like, okay, which one am I going to ask you? And what I found was interesting, and I don't know how involved you ever were in the price guide part, but it's interesting to me, at least this early on, Action Comics #1, not listed. Detective Comics 27, not listed. It was very interesting to me. It starts as like Action Comics 200 and something is like the first issue that's shown. I just thought that was an interesting choice, but I mean, maybe they were just, they were very hard to come by. So like, why would they even be listed? I don't know.
Yeah, that is interesting. I don't know the thought process behind that. And I think also it's indicative from my wildly off the mark answer that I was not really price guide oriented I mean,
it's also been 21 years and there's inflation. So, I mean, and there's a lot of reasons why that number is a hard one, but that's why I would throw it out to you as one last, way of torturing you today.
No, that's a good question though. I would not have guessed 10,000. I would have thought it was less, at that point in time. But then again, that year, probably 89 when the Batman movie came out, and between that and 93 with the explosion of the comic book industry and Image and the collector market, it doesn't surprise me that those, key back issue books, first appearances and whatnot, that I'm curious what Amazing Fantasy 15 was. I'm curious what it was in 1988, for example, 5 years prior, and I bet it wasn't close to 10,000. But I don't know. What do I know?
Well, Brian, thank you so much. You've been more than generous with your time, both this time and last time. I really appreciate you coming on and telling all your stories. It's not even all your stories, just some of your stories. But it's great to hear. So thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Adam. I appreciate you having me on, and sorry for blabbing so much.
Not at all. This has been an absolute treat. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Well, if you want to do a third one, if there's something else to talk about, I'm happy to do it.
I'll find a way.
All right. Thanks, Adam.